This is Outbreak News This Week, brought to you by the Global Dispatch Incorporated on AM 860 The Answer. Outbreak News This Week is your source for all the news about worms and germs. And now, your host, microbiologist and editor of OutbreakNewsToday.com. Here's Robert Harriman.
Well, good evening, Tampa Bay, and welcome to your source for all the news about worms and germs. I am Robert Harriman, and this is Outbreak News This Week. And for your daily dose of infectious disease news, please visit the website, OutbreakNewsToday.com. Bookmark it, check it out every day. It's always a great source for news that's going on around the globe and what's happening right here in our own backyard. So I encourage you to check it out. And I also want to encourage you to check out theGlobalDispatch.com. It's a full-fledged news site covering everything from politics to movies to pop culture to what's going on around the world. So I encourage you to check out those websites. Well, let me start off the show with probably what I would consider the biggest infectious disease story going on in the United States today, and that would be the ever-expanding Disneyland measles outbreak. And what we know as of Wednesday evening is that there are 59 total cases in California. Now, according to California health officials, 42 of them have been epidemiologically linked to the theme parks, Disneyland and the other Disney theme park there in Anaheim. Walt Disney World actually came out with a statement the other day and said that at least 5 Disney park employees have been infected with measles also. Now, the measles outbreak is not contained within the Golden State. It's spread to several places. We've seen at least one case in an infant in Mexico. Utah has seen 3 cases. Washington State, 2 cases. And Colorado and Oregon being the most recent one, with 1 case apiece. So it's the overall case total is somewhere pushing 70 now. So it's I think in California, it's probably the biggest measles outbreak right now in 10 or 20 years. So it's a big deal. And as we've talked before, that measles is a highly contagious disease, which makes people who are not vaccinated with the MMR, the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine, very susceptible to catching it. I discussed last week how transmissible this thing is. If you have 10 susceptible people in an area, 9 of them will catch the measles virus. So it's very, very transmissible. And with that in mind, those people should avoid going to the Disney parks for the time being. This is what California State epidemiologist Gil Chavez says. And he says that includes children who are too young to be immunized. So stay away from the Disney parks if you're not vaccinated, according to California health authorities. And even a Disneyland Resort's spokeswoman agreed in saying it is absolutely safe to visit if you are vaccinated. So they are discouraging people that are not vaccinated from going to Disney. So that's a pretty unusual thing for a money-making theme park. Moving up a little bit north of Florida, and if we go to Tennessee, another travel destination where we're seeing a little bit of news coming out with a different type of microorganism. It's called Norovirus. And what we've seen the past week or so is that at least 3 people have been confirmed positive for this gastrointestinal bug. It's a very nasty, abrupt gastrointestinal disease called Norovirus, linked to the Gaylord Opryland Resort and Convention Center. So Nashville, Tennessee, the land of country music, Right now, they are keeping an eye on Opryland Hotel and Norovirus. Right now, the state health department, the hotel, they're all working in conjunction. They're focusing right now on interviewing those who were ill and not ill in an effort to determine common connections in their effort to try to confirm a cause of the norovirus. And it's been bad for business for Opryland Hotel, much like it probably isn't helping Disneyland very much. There are reports of a lot of companies canceling events that were scheduled at the Opryland Hotel in Nashville, Tennessee. And like I said before, norovirus is highly contagious. You can get it from an infected person, contaminated food or water, touching contaminated surfaces. Anyone can be infected with norovirus and get sick. And also, you can have norovirus many times in your life, so there's no lifelong immunity from catching this virus. It can be quite serious, especially for the very young and the very old. Norovirus is the most common cause of acute gastroenteritis in the United States. And each year, about 20 million cases are reported, which contributes to about 70,000 hospitalizations annually and up to 800 deaths a year. So the best way to prevent getting norovirus is practicing proper hand washing and just general cleanliness. Okay, let's switch gears now. Now, Naegleria fowleri, this is also known in the media as the brain-eating amoeba, causes a very severe infection called primary amoebic meningoencephalitis, or PAM for short. And this is a disease of the central nervous system. It's pretty rare and almost always fatal. Only 3 people in the United States out of 132 have survived this horrible infection from 1962 to 2013, based on CDC numbers. Now, this is very relevant here in the state of Florida because a good portion of these 132 cases in the U.S. happen right here in this state. Well, joining me on the show is Dr. Sandra Gompf. She is an infectious disease expert with the University of South Florida, and she is someone whose family went through the heartache of losing a child to this very lethal and very preventable parasite. In 2009, Sandra and her husband lost their son, Philip. Hi, Dr. Gompf, and thanks for joining me today.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great. Before we get into your personal story, being an infectious disease doc, can you give an overview for my radio audience about the amoeba, how people contract it, where it's found, symptoms, et cetera, et cetera?
Sure. Naegleria fowleri is one of the free-living amoeba, like the King's amoeba and Balamuthia. It's best known by the public as the brain-eating amoeba, and the reason for that is that it invades the olfactory nerve, the nerve that you smell with, at the roots of the nasal cavity. It lives in almost all environments in the world, depending on the temperature range. It's a very wide range. Lives in soil and fresh water, not salt water. And so it's contracted mostly from unchlorinated or underchlorinated treated water. Usually, Naegleria fowleri is found in natural waters like lakes and rivers, hot springs, rainwater, drainage ponds, ditches, and that sort of thing. And most recently, because it's somewhat resistant to chlorination, if chlorine levels are low and the temperatures are right, it can actually grow in pipes. And it's been documented in undertreated plumbed water or municipal water in areas like Pakistan and most recently in Louisiana.
Mm-hmm.
from hose-fed water and household water. The public might recall some cases of Naegleria fowleri that was contracted from sinus rinses with neti pods, and most recently from a slip and slide. So that's pretty much Naegleria in a nutshell.
Right. Now, moving on to Philip's story, and as far as the infection,
Yes.
do you have any idea where he contracted the amoeba?
Yeah, we're fairly confident that he contracted it after tubing in Lake Arietta in Polk County in Florida. It's a large recreational lake, and he went there periodically with his cousins to play in the water and swim and go tubing and wakeboarding. About 5 to 6 days after the last time he went to Lake Arietta, he began to develop headaches and then fever. And very shortly after that, went to the hospital, and he passed away within 3 days.
Now, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, now, you're a physician, an infectious disease specialist.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for the average mom and pop, would they have any clue that was Naegleria? And did you think that could have been Naegleria when he first started showing symptoms?
Well, to be honest with you, I had been concerned about Naegleria and the kids swimming in the lakes for some time, but it's quote unquote rare, and we'll talk about that in a minute.
Right.
So we kind of had our guard down, and even though I'm an infectious disease specialist, I teach this for a living. My husband is a hospital pediatrician. He takes care of kids with meningitis in the hospital regularly. It was very subtle when he first became sick. He just had a bit of a headache, and he didn't usually have a headache. And we let him go to bed. He didn't have a fever or any other symptoms. And by morning, when my husband went in to check on him, he was difficult to wake up and was complaining of a headache, and his neck was stiff, which are the typical symptoms of very common bacterial meningitis.
Right.
And that was really our main concern at that time. By the time he had a spinal tap in the hospital that day, he had evidence of severe inflammation in the spinal fluid, but no bacteria were seen. And the only thing that could be assumed is that it was just a severe bacterial infection. At some point, we did recall that he had been swimming the week before in the lake, and the spinal fluid was tested for. Well, the microbiologist looked at it looking for amoeba, which is really the only thing you can do, and they didn't see it. Although, with as much inflammation and white blood cells in his spinal fluid, it would be difficult to find an amoeba,
Sure.
which looks very similar to a white blood cell. So, things pretty rapidly progressed from there. He began to hallucinate and complain more and more of headache, and by the next day he started having seizures and stopped breathing on his own. He had to be intubated. By the day after that, he was essentially brain dead.
Wow.
That was a very difficult thing for us, as you might imagine. As physicians, we see this sort of thing all the time, unfortunately, and it's hard enough to deal with it as a professional. When you see your child go through it, you can't imagine anybody else going through it.
Yeah, I can imagine it's a very helpless feeling too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Here we were able to treat so many different things, and there was absolutely nothing. We knew that he was destined to die within half an hour of his having the spinal tap done. and we knew that, I knew the only thing that we could do was wait and keep him comfortable and try to reassure him as long as we could.
Sure. Well, let me get away from the medicine and the science for a moment. And this is a very human story, not just a medical story. And I want to give you a moment, if you want, to talk about your son and the memory or,
Sure.
whatever you like to do, Dr. Gompf.
Sure. Well, Philip was a very bright boy. He had a very intense personality. He was very enthusiastic about everything. He loved nature. He loved being in the water. He loved science. He really wanted to be an engineer or a scientist of some kind, and that's what he looked forward to. One of his personal characteristics was perseverance, his personality. You could never say no. He would always find a way to overcome a problem or an obstacle. And just remembering that quality of his, we try to continue that in our lives. We try to persevere, and that's helped us deal with his loss and keep his memory alive and keep his personality alive.
God bless you. Okay, let me go back into the discussion about the parasite itself. And historically, treatment for Naegleria has been pretty unsuccessful. We saw what may have been some success in 2013 with the Arkansas girl with miltefosine. But can you talk about any advances in treatments, advances in diagnostics? You talked about just looking for the amoeba on a slide on the microscope. What's out there right now compared to 2009 when you went through your personal tragedy?
Right. Well, unfortunately, there's not a whole lot that's been new since then. We have a serious need for a rapid diagnostic tool that can be rapidly deployed by a hospital laboratory. The only thing that we have now is an experienced microscopist can look at the spinal fluid under a microscope and look for evidence of movement that would suggest a purposeful amoeba-type movement and not just white cells.
Right.
That's, as I alluded to earlier, it's difficult for someone who hasn't seen Naegleria or amoeba in spinal fluid before. It's hard to know what you're looking for. It's hard to distinguish from everything else that's in the spinal fluid. So it's very easy to miss it.
I would imagine too that the number of microbiologists that are even familiar with seeing this is very, very small.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So there's that issue. There is a rapid diagnostic test, a polymerase chain reaction test that is mostly a research test. It's available through the CDC. It's not something that most laboratories are set up to perform in the hospital with a quick turnaround. So usually if that test is done, it's going to be at autopsy or several days into illness.
Right.
If the CDC is involved. So we really need much better, more sensitive and faster diagnostic assays. Now, secondly, we also need more awareness among health professionals and parents, and that's something that I want to talk about that a little bit more because we do have a foundation project to do that. But also, as far as treatments,
yes.
We really don't have a highly effective treatment that we know of at this point. There used to be drug discovery efforts, and that really has not been done. I will say, miltefosine, there was a lot of hope for that, and there still is a lot of hope that if it's used early enough, preferably within 12 to 24 hours of the start of symptoms, that could be effective. And everyone was very excited about the girl who recovered in Arkansas. There was another case of a child who was treated perhaps a little later in the game with meltofosine, and he survived with significant neurologic deficits.
Right.
So it's possible, do we need to do combination therapies with these drugs? Are there other things that need to be done to protect the brain during treatment? Those are things that need to be explored, and they just haven't at this point. Now, I do have a little bit of exciting news to share just in the last day or so. One of my colleagues at the University of South Florida College of Medicine, the Molecular Biology Department, Dennis Kyle, he has been studying parasites like malaria. He has an NIH grant for that. But one of the things that he's always wanted to work on is Naegleria fowleri. And in recent years, there have been some new techniques for discovering drugs so that you can actually test many chemicals at the same time in a rapid period of time and be able to pick up potential new drug candidates for various organisms. So he actually started. He applied for a grant from NIH, and he received it. And he, for the last several months, has been working on a rapid testing method for drug discovery in Naegleria fowleri. And his preliminary results have just been published in the last few days in a clinical journal. And so far, he's got at least 5, maybe 11 potential candidates.
Oh, excellent.
For drugs that would be very highly effective, much more effective anyway than the drugs that we have now. So that's pretty exciting.
Sure. Now, I'm coming up on a hard break, and hopefully you can stay till after the break, because I have more to ask you. But I know a year or so when I talked to the Lewises down in Texas, I'm sure you're familiar with them, right?
Yes.
Kyle Cares.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. They were donating money to the CDC earmarked specifically for Naegleria. Do you, in 1 minute, do you know, is the CDC working on anything special? I mean, what are they doing up there in Atlanta?
Well, the CDC right now is mostly working on education and physician awareness because that's a key. If the physicians don't know to look for it, then it doesn't matter what you have to treat it with.
Right.
It needs to be diagnosed quickly. So we recently had a speaker come down, Jonathan Yoder, who's one of the CDC scientists, who did a lecture for us on Naegleria fowleri and what's been going on. And that, I think, is probably the most important use right now.
Oh, yeah. Because, I mean, as you and I both know, this is 100% preventable. Absolutely. Yeah. All right. Well, Dr. Gompf, I'm coming up on a hard break, and if you can kindly hold, and we'll continue with the interview after the commercial. Thank you very much. And I want to encourage the audience to go to the website. It's outbreaknewstoday.com. All kinds of infectious disease news from around the globe, and a real good source if you're into that type of information. And I will see you after the break.
Outbreak News This Week with Robert Harriman continues after this.
With SRN News, I'm Gordon Griffin. New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio says the snowstorm bearing down on the Northeast could be among the worst the city has ever seen. Officials are urging city residents to stay off roads beginning tomorrow night when a blizzard warning takes effect from the New York and Boston areas. National Weather Service says that the storm could drop 2 to 3 feet of snow from northern New Jersey to southern Connecticut. President Obama is defending his counterterrorism strategy in Yemen as influential lawmakers from both parties suggested that the U.S. may need to send special operations forces to root out terrorists. Speaking in India, the president rejected the notion of moving away from the current drone-based campaign against al-Qaeda in Yemen to a heavier footprint on the ground. British officials say they're reviewing security measures in the government after a hoax caller managed to get through to Prime Minister David Cameron on the phone. This is SRN News.
The Dennis Prager Show.
That's the reason they really dislike the evangelicals, because they really do. They put up a fight. It is another reason I have such contempt for leftism, in that it never fights evil. That's why I loathed it from my college years.
Weekdays at noon on AM 860. The Answer.
What does it take to live an uncommon life? Here's former Super Bowl winning coach Tony Dungy with today's uncommon moment.
There is no clearer showcase of your character than the way you treat others and expect them to treat you. The way you handle relationships, particularly your close ones, will impact every other area of your life in one way or another. According to 1 Corinthians 13, love means doing everything for someone else's benefit. That doesn't mean passively giving in to the other person's every wish or being dominated in the relationship. It means making every decision with the other person's well-being in mind. Be active in the lives of your spouse, your family members, and your friends. Real love changes lives, including yours.
New York Times best-selling author Tony Dungy. Discover more at CoachDungy.com. That's CoachDungy.com.
If you had $25,000 to bet against Warren Buffett, would you? Hi, I'm Nicholas Vardy, a London-based money manager, and I've put $25,000 of my own money on the line against one of the most successful investors of our time. And I'm so confident I'll beat the Oracle of Omaha, I've decided to go public and share the details of my bet against Buffett on my website, nicholasvardy.com. There, I'll also tell you 2 ways you too can beat Buffett. One strategy is up an incredible 1,456% over the last 14 years, versus 252% for Buffett. To get my free special report on my bet against Buffett, plus 2 ways you can beat Buffett too, visit www.nicholasvardy.com. That's NICHOLASVARDY.com. nicholasvardy.com.
This afternoon will produce brilliant sunshine, high 64. Mostly cloudy tonight with a shower later on, low 55. We will see showers tomorrow morning, otherwise it will be partly sunny and windy, high 65. And Tuesday, partly sunny and breezy, high 64. That's your Ranky Weather forecast. I'm Jermaine Pearson for AM 860, The Answer.
Welcome back to Outbreak News This Week, your source for all the news about worms and germs. Here's your host, microbiologist and editor of OutbreakNewsToday.com, Robert Harriman.
Well, welcome back to the program. A big portion of today's show and next week's show is I want to delve into amoeba awareness. Some of these amoebas are quite rare, at least according to the experts. However, they are also quite deadly. So a lot of this is just based on being aware and doing the right prevention. And with me is Dr. Sandra Gompf with the University of South Florida. And not only is she an infectious disease physician, but she also, unfortunately, lost a son to Naegleria fowleri, the brain-eating amoeba. Dr. Gompf, let's go on into the awareness. And you've been very involved in this since this tragedy happened in your life. And a lot of it is through the University of South Florida. And can you talk about that?
Sure. Well, shortly after my son died, Dr. John Sinnott, who's currently the chair of internal medicine at the College of Medicine at USF, established a foundation fund in Philip's name. It's the Philip T. Gompf Memorial Fund for Infectious Diseases. And the purpose of the fund is to promote education in the field of infectious diseases for both the public and for health professionals. So the fund has actually supported some scholarships and awards for medical students and residents who've excelled in the study of infectious diseases. We've given about 4 awards so far. The latest effort, and the most ambitious effort, has been our AmoebaSeason.com project, and that essentially, one of the things that I've discussed with other parents who've lost children to Naegleria is the complete shock that this sort of thing even exists. Parents are not aware of it. Doctors don't even think about it. So the goal was just to provide as much education as possible. So essentially, we built this from the ground up, so to speak. We have a website, amoebaseason.com, with a lot of information for both health professionals and the lay public. We have downloadable, printable information, flyers, presentations, links to the CDC, links to the medical literature, scientific literature for health professionals, and some information about the Memorial Fund itself. Part of AmoebaSeason.com project is social media, awareness and outreach, and we have a Facebook site. We also have a Twitter handle, Amoeba Season, and I tried to, last year from May through the end of August, I posted updates regularly on what was going on new with Naegleria research, cases, potential cases, a lot of mostly prevention messages, because prevention is so easy and 100% of prevention is 100%. Unlike so many other diseases, there's very little that you can say, well, we can prevent this 100%. Mm-hmm. This is one of them. So, and I try to make our messages positive, because it's yes, this is scary, and yes, this is 99% lethal, but boy, it is so easy to prevent, and prevention is cheap. You just,
I saw on your website, which is a very nice website, by the way, and you have a fantastic collection of photographs. But you also talk a lot about nose clips and things like that.
Yes, and a lot of it is common sense at this point, because it's rare enough that it's very hard to do any research on what actually prevents it. But we know, of course, that staying out of the water when the temperatures are high will certainly reduce your risk to next to zero. Nose clips are a common sense measure. Try to keep water out of the nose, and avoiding fresh water, untreated water when it's the best temperatures at which the infectious form of the amoeba grows is between 80 to 115 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's, most of the summer between June and August, maybe even longer than that lately with warming climates. That's prime time for Naegleria to grow.
Yeah, and can I just point something out that people shouldn't be fooled that it's only happening in Florida and Texas either, because there have been cases up north.
Yeah, and we had that on the website as well. One of the concerns that CDC has had lately is that the latitude may be expanding. The range of Naegleria may be expanding because of global climate change. We're seeing there's been a few cases now in as far north as Minnesota.
Right.
So it doesn't have to be down south, the southern tier states. It's not necessarily restricted to the really warm areas of the country, and it is common in other parts of the world. Pakistan every year to have several cases.
Yeah, it's been at least a dozen this year, I think.
Yeah. About almost half of their water supply, their municipal water supply, is underchlorinated.
Mm-hmm.
And they also they have a religious practice where they rinse their nose before prayer. So that adds the risk. This has been documented in Australia in the 60s and 70s. Most recently, a boy who traveled from Orlando to Costa Rica and swam in a hot spring.
Yep, saw that. Became
infected. This is a ubiquitous organism in the environment. It grows everywhere.
Let me piggyback on something we talked about a little bit earlier, and we talked about how rare this is, and I think you had something to say about that, the actual rarity of Naegleria.
Yeah, I think the fact that it is rare really throws people off, and you miss half the story, really, because yes, it's rare, but if you look at some of the numbers and the estimates of how much Naegleria is in the water in summer lakes during the hottest time of the year, there are anywhere between 10 and 1,000 amoeba per liter of water in the summer lakes.
Wow.
And the risk, if you calculate using some of the data that's been published, the risk of amoebic meningitis at the height of summer, where you have maybe 1,000 amoeba per liter of water, is about 2 to 3 per 400 swims. And if you're a regular swimmer 10 times a year for 10 years, when it's hottest in the summer, your risk is not nil. It turns out to be about 2 in a million swims, which is, it sounds like not much, but it winds up being very similar to the odds of being struck by lightning in Florida. And we all know in Florida not to stand outside in a thunderstorm in a field. We teach our kids to seek shelter away from lightning. We all know in Florida not to walk our dogs or small children near lakes where there are alligators, because they can be attacked. We know about shark attacks. And interestingly enough, the risk of amoebic meningitis is a bit lower, of course, than the risk of shark attacks or alligator deaths. But those things are a lot less lethal than Naegleria fowleri.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note also that for the parents and all that the water has to rush up the nose. You can't get this by swallowing the water.
Exactly, yes. This is not a disease that you get from swallowing. The way that Naegleria infects is by invading the olfactory nerve, which is very close to the surface at the roof of the nasal cavity. So, it's just a weak spot there, and the amoeba can easily invade and travel directly up to the center of the brain. So if you swallow water containing Naegleria, it's not going to reach that area.
Right.
You're going to swallow it, and it won't do anything.
And I'll, staying on the topic of awareness, I also see that you got some billboards put up, which I find pretty amazing.
Yeah, those, we developed those. I came up with the idea for the design, and my daughter, who has some experience in web design and graphics, did the graphic design. And we have about 6 digital billboards that were on display throughout the summer last year on I-4, Interstate 4, both the eastbound and westbound side. So those got a lot of views in local areas. I got a lot of good comments about those. People had seen them. They told people about them. The messages were pretty clear and strong. So we're going to be starting those up again, starting in May.
Great. That's an excellent tool. Now, if someone wants to learn more about your website, or if they want to donate to the cause of Amoeba Awareness, where would they find it? The websites, the social media, etc.
Yeah, well, if you Google Amoeba Season, you will pull up our Facebook site on Google. You'll pull up our website. And on Twitter, our handle is Amoeba Season.
Okay, great.
The spelling is AMOEBA for amoeba. And you'll find links there to a lot of information and references. The most comprehensive area is, of course, our website. We have lots of informational links there to CDC and things like that. And we also have a link on the website for the fund. It's a USF Foundation fund. It's number 250155, and it is it's a 501c organization, so there are some tax benefits there. But you can find the donation links there on the website as well.
Excellent, and I'll be sure to post these links when I get the podcast, and I'll post them on OutbreakNewsToday.com. And one last question. As a mother, a parent, what advice would you give other parents? I mean, just straight up advice, concerning prevention, what to avoid. Keep it nice and simple. This is what you should do. Yeah.
Well, the key is in summertime, when the water is warm, is to keep water from untreated water or fresh natural water from getting up the nose. So nose clips are important while swimming in lakes and rivers or hot springs. Keep kids out of rainwater, drainage ponds, and ditches. Kids are certainly attracted to water. Teach them that that's not a good place to swim. Hose-fed inflatables and slip and slides have really exploded in the last couple of years in terms of popularity and availability. And hose-fed water is a potential risk for Naegleria fowleri as well. So parents might want to consider using nose clips on those inflatable toys and slip and slides.
Yeah, and there was a fatal case in Louisiana concerning a slip and slide a couple years ago.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and as a matter of fact, CDC just published that case description and investigation in Clinical Infectious Disease Journal, and within the last week as well.
Great.
A very, very thorough description. Children using kiddie pools, baby pools, playing with hoses, that's all water that's really very underchlorinated usually. And I teach my kids to keep water from getting up their nose and from hoses, in kiddie pools and even in the bathtub and showers.
Sure.
Some of the cases in Australia were from bathtubs.
Right.
So just keep that water up the nose. Try to teach kids to avoid getting fresh water up the nose, just as a matter of awareness, just like we teach kids to avoid lightning when there's thunder outside and storms outside.
Yeah.
It's just very basic common sense.
Yep, very simple. Okay, well, I want to thank Dr. Sandra Gompf. Thank you for your time and the great work that you're doing for Amoeba Awareness, and God bless you and your family, ma'am.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
You bet, anytime. Thanks a lot. Okay, and I want you be sure to tune in next week as I continue with the Amoeba Awareness with a member of Team Coral Reef. They're out of California, and they're going to talk about another personal tragedy of a loss of life due to a even more unknown amoeba, and that's called Balamuthia. So be sure to check in for that story. I'm sure you'll find it very interesting. Okay. Excellent interview. I'm so grateful to have Dr. Gompf on the show. And let's switch gears to Ebola. My what appears to be weekly Ebola update. And I actually got a little kind of a fascinating thing to talk about. Well, let me go through some of the numbers right now. As of Thursday, the Ebola outbreak in West Africa stands at over 21,600 cases, over 8,600 deaths in the three hardest hit countries. But we are seeing some really, really good news. The World Health Organization is saying that the case incidence continues to fall in Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone, with a halving time of 1.4 weeks in Guinea, 2 weeks in Liberia, and 2.7 weeks in Sierra Leone. So that's really huge. And in fact, Dr. Christopher Dye, he's a director of strategy in the office of the Director General of the WHO, told BBC News recently that the incidence is pretty clearly going down in all three countries now. Each of the last 3 weeks has been the most promising we've seen so far. The message is reductions in all places. I would have identified the turning point as the beginning of the decline, first in Liberia and then later in Sierra Leone and Guinea. So fantastic news. Maybe this outbreak will be gone in 2015, as many have speculated. More good news. The country of Mali that got their first imported infection back in October, and then they had several other infections. They have been declared free of Ebola virus disease after completing 42 days since the last case tested negative for Ebola. So great news for Mali. Now, fascinating story that I found is that, not only humans are susceptible to Ebola, I've talked about that in the past, primates like gorillas and chimps are also in danger of Ebola. And actually, they do have it worse. The disease is even deadlier for the great apes than it is for humans. And this is according to a report in The Conversation. It's a nonprofit media outlet. And they say that a third of gorillas and chimps have died from the deadly virus since the 1990s. The report goes on to say mortality rates for gorillas, about 95%. If they catch Ebola, 95% fatality. 77% for chimpanzees, while human beings, as we see in West Africa, it's about 50 to 60%. So it's even worse. Now, Mira Inglis, she's a doctoral candidate in conservation policy at the University of Sheffield in England, said an outbreak in 1995 killed more than 90% of gorillas in Gabon in one particular park. in 2002 to 2003, another outbreak killed about 5,000 gorillas in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And she says there's only about 100,000 gorillas left in the wild. So safe and effective vaccine has already been developed for apes, she wrote, but the trials have not involved challenging the vaccinated chimps with live virus. So I encourage you to check that out. It's a website called The Conversation, and it's a very interesting story about what Ebola is doing to the great apes. Get a little chikungunya confusion this week. Earlier this week, I reported that the CDC issued a travel notice for travelers going to the North Atlantic island of Bermuda, a vacation paradise of sorts. And they wrote in December 2014, Bermuda reported local transmission of chikungunya. This is the first time that local transmission has been reported in Bermuda, the CDC noted. It was also reported by the Pan American Health Organization, a arm of the World Health Organization. So in a report I did on Wednesday on OutbreakNewsToday.com, Bermuda came out and said they did a press release. They disputed the CDC claims. They say that they were apparently in contact with the CDC, requesting that the information be removed. They say the source used by the CDC had been identified and also was being corrected. The PAHO had been reporting 7 suspected